My name is Lisa Backer, and I have the privilege of supervising the early childhood special ed teams with the Minnesota Department of Education. So I'm responsible for both Part C and Section 619. Now, can I just see a show of hands? How many of you in the room are the folks on the development side of this research to practice challenge? How many of you are the researchers, the developers, the people that are, kind of building that, doing that kind of work? Higher ed folks, researchers. Okay, how many of you are the implementers then, the people that are going to be at the local or state level trying to put this into practice? Let's see those hands, because that's where I fall, and I just want to see where my compatriots are out there. Okay, thank you. So the kind of the talking points that I was asked to speak about are challenges, realities, and opportunities of implementation and quality improvement at scale. Not entirely sure why I was asked to do this, because I feel like we are at such a beginning point in our work, but we have at least made some good progress. I come from Minnesota, and in Minnesota it is a nice place. People are Minnesota nice, and I use this slide because it says single lane ahead, please take turns. And watching people drive in some of the big urban areas that I occasionally get to visit, I don't know if that would necessarily work as a road construction sign, but it works in Minnesota. We do have a lot of nice people. We have a lot of people that absolutely care about early childhood education in the state of Minnesota. When I think about our challenges, these numbers represent some of our challenges. We have 509 different state pre-K programs, 232 Head Start and Early Head Start programs, 118 Part C programs, 306 preschool special ed programs, and 12,888 child care programs, and we're not a huge state. So when I think about scaling up, those aren't teachers, those are programs. So how do we scale up to 14,000 plus programs? And those numbers don't just represent programs. The state pre-K program has its state level leadership and its PD system and its state rules. And the Head Start program, of course, has a well-developed national support structure and a state support structure, as does pre-K and special ed. Though at least in Minnesota, unlike a lot of states, we are a unified system. We are a birth to 5 special education delivery system. And then, of course, the child care program is enormous in its scope and its resources and its size, but it also presents some of the greatest challenges because those key people who are spending the most critical time with our youngest learners tend to have the least level of education and training, and we've got to flip that on its ear somehow. So when we started really thinking about professional development, this was the Professional Development Advisory System in Minnesota. We had 4 different entities charged with making decisions that really didn't seem to impact each other. And we really started thinking hard about professional development when we started measuring outcomes beginning in 2006. And so we had a Professional Development Advisory Committee that was created in state statute to advise the child care professional development system. And we had an interagency coordinating council that was created in the federal language to advise just the Part C system. We had an early childhood advisory council that came out of the Head Start legislation that advised a piece of it. And then we were fortunate enough to be selected to be a National Professional Development Center on Inclusion state, so our first role was to create an advisory council. And none of these groups really talked to each other, but that was our reality. NPDCI gave us a framework. We didn't have one before, but we really now started having a shared conversational lexicon, and at least the NPDCI group became cross-sector. From the beginning, we wanted to think strategically, how do we get people from the Head Start PD system and the state pre-K PD system, our special ed system, all in the same room using a shared language, and so we adopted a framework. Then we decided, well, if we're going to really do professional development, we needed something to hang it on. We needed an infrastructure. And so because at that time we were focused, at least in my world, I was focused very exclusively on Part C and 619 programs, we created the Minnesota Centers of Excellence for Young Children with Disabilities. We got some great support from Camille Catlett from Frank Porter Graham at Chapel Hill, so I want to acknowledge her support. But what we did with this, it was kind of a big deal because in order to create this, we had to find money that in the state we felt wasn't being used as effectively as it could possibly be. And in a state system, there's not a lot of extra money sitting around. So in order to free up some resources, we had to take money from kind of some sacred cows. And so know that within states, that's work that's possible, but painful. But we were able to pull $2 million a year out of a system that wasn't as effective as it could be and move it into professional development. We wanted to create something that was sustainable. We started with stimulus dollars, but we all know the stimulus dollars were a wonderful gift that is now almost gone. And we shifted to C and Part C 619 funds in order to create cross-sector PD opportunities. We were the perfect storm in Minnesota because not only were we an NPDCI state, but we were a state that was part of Karen Blasey and Dean Fixon's scaling up implementation science work. So we had that overlay on top of our work, and Karen came to Minnesota once a month, every month, to help us do our work. And then we got our Christmas present. We were selected to be a taxi state, and taxi really gave us a content to wrap our arms around. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of what I think of as the IKEA model of professional development, and that's what Taxi and Cephal really brought to Minnesota because it was full of tools. It wasn't just, this is what you need to do, but it was, this is how you do it. If you're familiar with Taxi and Cephal, it was a package. They had tools for instructors, for coaches, for teachers, for administrators, for those responsible for data collection, and for parents. So it was a fairly easy package to implement within a state. We started with 3 sites, and it took us a year to support those 3 sites in a very intensive, strategic way. We then, the following year, moved to an additional 12 sites and then an additional 15 sites. So 3 years into implementation, we still haven't cracked that 50 site mark, but we feel like we are doing it with a level of fidelity across sites because we had all of the wonderful tools that supported implementers at every stage. It wasn't just teachers, it wasn't just administrators, it was everyone. Now, I showed that picture of all the crazy PD systems. Minnesota is also a race to the top team state, and this is our new structure, and you can see it really makes a lot more sense. We now have leadership from a governor, a cross-department children's cabinet, an early learning council, and private sector engagement, and then our 3 state agencies linked for the first time by an Office of Early Learning. And I share this diagram just as an opportunity because I think this kind of work and alignment is happening across many, many states. And so I think we have an opportunity that we haven't had before because states are more poised and more ready to implement effectively across sector and across department the kinds of professional development initiatives that you brilliant people are developing. So thank you very much for your work.
that we as an early childhood community are being held responsible for what happens afterwards, and that EPIC will increase the dose and the strength of the effects, and other approaches will as well. But is it enough to think about that 1 year, or do we have to think, when you talk about continuity, do we have to take the EPIC step of thinking about what happens in the subsequent grade and what kind of tight alignment and feedback loops we need there? And then third, in terms of distributed leadership, I really had the pleasure of going onto your university's website and learning a lot more about this, and how literature reviews have been saying that principals need to be leaders of leaders, that we need not to disempower our staffs, but to include them in decision-making and leadership and create leadership teams. But to me, the critical question, because I saw fade out as so central to your presentation, the critical question to me for future research is, what can we do to effectively create teaching teams that include early childhood and kindergarten and first grade? I think we have enormous challenges in kindergarten, among kindergarten teachers right now, facing a huge range in the skills of the children, in the languages of the children. We're giving some children a boost, and then kindergarten teachers are faced with some children who are doing very well and others who are not. And now, Catherine Magnuson, I'm thinking of your work on catch-up as opposed to fade-out. What do we need to do in our teaching teams to help the kindergarten teachers not just let the kids who've had the boost sit and marinate for a year while they catch everybody up? What do we need in terms of teaching, distributed teaching teams that will help us with the carry-through of our early boosts into subsequent years? And what do we need to study that would create continuity of teaching teams across early childhood into the early grades? I think this is just absolutely critical. So I'm going to conclude just by saying distributed leadership did not bring about effects on child outcomes. It brought about effects in Pennsylvania on school climate, on sense of engagement of teachers. We know that the work environments of teachers are critical in early childhood. We know that this is critical. But if we're going to be thinking about child outcomes as the ultimate goal of our logic model, we need to make sure that something like distributed teaching, distributed leadership actually has effects on child outcomes, as in all the presentations. We need to deliver to the end product. And if you are urging us to take all three pieces of data systems with feedback loops, of an integrated child assessment with curriculum and professional development, and distributed teaching teams, we're going to need to be able to, first of all, cope with the complexity of dealing with three interventions with fidelity, and second of all, test empirically that doing all three is actually going to augment the effects and prevent the fade out, so that we actually deliver in terms of child outcomes. So the most important end product, and the thing you made me think about, is what are the studies that we need to show that you get greater outcomes when you take all three into account, and especially those key transition points between early childhood and kindergarten. Thank you.
We have 10 or 15 minutes that I want to open it up. We have some mics here that Leslie can bring around to folks, but pretty much what's on your minds? Any questions you have for any of us up here at the podium? Open floor.
While there's a social facilitation waiting to happen, could I just respond to the thoughtful comments that Marty made? And again, I think it's a function of trying to communicate in 15 minutes. But what's really important, and Marty highlighted, the whole issue of data security is really important. In these integrated systems, these mature systems, there are governance boards. The governance boards are the people who basically contribute their data. The governance boards actually act as the ethics. They operate from their HIPAA and FERPA responsibilities to make sure that everything that is done, they have a veto right as to whether or not information can be used. Every use is approved by a governing board. So the important issues that Marty underscored there are critical. With respect to EPIC, I didn't make my point clear. But we're talking about moving EPIC into kindergarten, first grade. So the issue is the continuity. We are developing measurement that will actually be seamless, connecting and actually building on the curriculum to kindergarten in the context of a school building. So we're talking about early childhood programs in an elementary school building, so that addresses the disconnect. So we're trying to basically build a school building, build a upward extension, an evidence-based upward extension. And I think the issue that we found with the distributed leadership is that the school district did not have a core curriculum, nor did it have useful formative assessments. So what's happening with the distributed, unless the teachers have good instruction and good assessments, their work as a distributed leadership team is empty. So the point is that you need to have really good, strong instructional materials for them to distribute on. So that's where we are talking about the connection of. But clearly we're not talking about, I think Ed Ziegler has talked to us sufficiently about the vaccination model. We're talking about actually building from pre-K in the same school building. That's what we're trying to do.
Hi, I'm Louisa Torillo. I wanted to ask a question of Jason. I was really interested in your site level differences, and I wondered if you had information you could share with us about any sort of systematic differences in the quality of the settings prior to the interventions. We're really thinking about this, and also just wanted to clarify with you, was the random assignment was at the teacher level as opposed to center or school level? So I was just curious about whether in any of these cases you saw more of a community of learners or if it was just single classroom types of interventions.
Those are great questions. And so design-wise, within each site, the teachers, it was at the teacher level, the classroom level that the randomization occurred. So there could be a program or a center in which teachers were in opposite conditions. And your question around whether there were incoming kind of quality issues, so in all the analyses I showed with impacts on teacher outcomes, we actually controlled for incoming with early observations on the class. So we didn't just sit with our intent to treat design and look at posts, we controlled. So we are accounting for that to some degree. We're at the stage, we've tried to explore some potential kind of curriculum differences and choices across sites and programs, but nothing that we measured at this point have we been able to use to explain some of that site variability. And so I think Marty brought up some points I think around culture and things like the just the program culture and what the mission is and administrative support. There are lots of things that we didn't measure. We've measured a lot of things. If I listed all the things that we measured, it would make your jaw drop. But there are still others that clearly we didn't quite tap into to help us explain those site differences. Bob?
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think the site differences were profound. We didn't go into a lot of sites by design. We went into a lot of sites because of, essentially challenges in recruitment. The other thing that's an important context for this study that I didn't mention in my remarks was that the study basically launched when the economy crashed, and we were working. We're basically working with some of the more vulnerable, people in the workforce, as we already know, who were made more vulnerable. Who knows how that affected some of these unseen variables, because we did try to track as much as possible these features of sites, curriculum, training, all the kinds of things that we all put in our assessment packages, and very little of them seem to have sort of much predictive power, at least as moderators of treatment effects, because you would expect those to operate that way. I'm not convinced that some of the larger contextual issues didn't infiltrate in ways that kind of undermined effects in ways that are completely unmeasured. but it's part of the context.
Okay, go ahead, Peg.
Okay, just to follow up very briefly on Bob and Jason's comments, I think that one of the things that's most interesting and perplexing about these side effects is that there are side effects on child outcomes, not on observed practices. And so, you know, when you think of the logic model, the intervention was designed to change practices, and it seemed to do that without a whole lot of site differences. Where we're seeing the differences is between, you know, in how that then affects how children, the amount of change children showed over time between fall and spring on things like language, literacy, and attention kinds of outcomes. And so it's very, you know, we're very perplexed, and we really do want to try to explore this more deeply, but it's an interesting issue to try to think about.
Hi, I'm Mercy Whitebook, and just in this issue of site differences, well, I'll be talking about this tomorrow, but we've been working on a measure of the adult learning environment because we've been focusing so much on what teachers need to know.